Welcome back to the Changemaker Podcast. I'm your host, Deke Copenhaver. Today, my guest is Nick Sonnenberg. Nick is an entrepreneur, Wall Street Journal best-selling author, and columnist, and guest lecturer at Columbia University. Before founding Leverage, he spent 8 years working as a high-frequency trader on Wall Street, where he developed a love for and obsession with efficiency. Nick, I will tell you, been looking forward to this. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the Changemaker Podcast, hosted by Deke Copenhaver. Deke is the author of The Changemaker, a Forbes publishing book that has reached #1 on Amazon on multiple occasions and in multiple categories like management skills and total quality management. During this podcast, Deke interviews exceptional change-making leaders. Deke currently operates Copenhaver Consulting, where he helps local governments and other public organizations maximize their potential. He's also a sought-after public speaker. We hope that the Changemaker has an impact on you today and that you find takeaways that make you a better leader in your life. Now, here's Deke.
Thanks for having me.
Well, so just for a little background, where did you grow up? How did you get to the point where you are now, where you have an obsession with efficiency? And God bless you for having it, because we need more people like you.
I grew up in LA, and I think my whole life I've always just been obsessed with time. Even starting at a young age, my mom's British and very long-winded, and I remember at a young age I'd be like hearing a bedtime story and be like, all right, I get the point. So she was wearing red and she got eaten by a wolf. So I've always kind of, just been anxious about time and always wanted to maximize my time. And, when I went into college, I strategically kind of like mapped out which courses are going to cover the most amount of general education requirements as possible. And, I kind of like mapped it out in the first week so that I only had to do classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I was able to graduate a year early, and I had a lot of fun too. So like I've always just had this kind of tick for saving time, cutting corners. To me, it's like I like problem solving, and it's a big puzzle to kind of solve. And then when I got into finance and I was a high frequency trader, in that space, microseconds can literally mean millions.
Yeah.
I'm coding computers, building algorithms to trade stocks at microsecond speeds, all based off of math. And again, like it really just even further enhanced my awareness of the value of time. And the conversations and the types of things I was thinking about is how can I automate one thing or cut one corner to literally save 10 microseconds? So I've just been programmed over my life to be thinking in a certain way. And then when I got into startups, I just, took that way of thinking and tried making organizations and teams more efficient.
It's interesting because I've always been sort of obsessed with time myself. But so I spent 9 years in office as mayor. But one of the things I figured out, and I've taken this into the private sector, is to me, if you can get directly to decision makers, anytime, so many people spend so much time going through middlemen and trying to get things scheduled. I'm like, you just cut out so much time in the process if you're dealing directly with decision makers. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that there's a difference between efficiency, which is doing things right, and effectiveness, which is doing the right things.
Yeah.
And what's that famous quote? Like, was it Ben Franklin about, efficiency, and it's, the worst thing to do is to work on something that shouldn't even be done in the first place. And I think that maybe you shouldn't even be talking to certain people except for a decision maker. Or likewise, oftentimes I've seen with clients, I've even fallen into this trap in my company, which is you spend time optimizing and automating and perfecting some process that in 6 months you find out, actually your business model is changing and that you're not even going to offer that service anymore. So all that time in that process just went to waste. So it's whether it's in investing time in processes that might change, or investing time building relationships or speaking to someone that isn't the most strategic. I think I think everything kind of boils down to, am I spending my time efficiently and effectively in every respect?
It's interesting though. An observation I've made since the pandemic hit is that there's still people in leadership positions that want to cling to the status quo. And it's like, there's no such thing as the status quo anymore. But particularly, and I just would love to get your take on this because it does get into efficiencies. So in the media, had a call-in radio show for a year, but in the media and so many businesses, it just seems like there's an attitude of, but we've always done it this way. I had a former producer from MSNBC, Ariana Picari, on my show. There's a friend of mine, but she said, okay, media investments, cable news industry based totally on ratings. And I said, well, how accurate are those ratings? She said, I studied it. They're not accurate at all. So because they're still doing things antiquatedly, like calling landlines. But that's got to frustrate you when you look around you. I mean, you're helping businesses and individuals become more efficient, that to see certain industries or certain businesses where it's like, no, I'll cling to the status quo you'll pry the status quo from my cold, dead hand.
Yeah. I talk about this in my book that came out this year. And challenging the status quo is just, if you want to survive, it's just got to be part of your culture. And one of the things I talk about in the book is my experience as a high frequency trader. And in that job, every year you have to do a 2-week block leave, which basically means you get shut out of all systems. You can't come to the office. You can't access email. And it's really like a full off grid to make sure, primarily it was started to make sure that you weren't hiding trades.
Yeah.
Obviously, me and my colleague, like, we weren't doing anything like that. But what it also did was it forced you to document how you do things, and it forced a backup to kind of get up to speed. And I've got to tell you, every year for 8 years, when I would come back from vacation, there'd always be some new idea or some improvement with how my book traded. And even though I'm spending, 12, 14 hours a day thinking about that stuff, and I'm the world expert at that, index or my algorithm, fresh eyes spark innovation, and it's hard to see the label when you're inside the jar. And I think that, something that we've done and I've seen successful at other companies is you extend that kind of idea and you force role rotations to force the challenging of the status quo. Because if you don't kind of force it, it's just not part of human nature. So, hey, this quarter, we're going to pick one process and we're going to do a swap. All right. You're going to do payroll for a week.
Yeah.
And then that forces someone to document what they do, which is helpful because now if they leave, you've got an asset. And it forces a reevaluation process. It forces someone else to, hey, why are we doing that? Didn't we change like 6 months ago and don't even use that system anymore? Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, man, I missed that. So it's just a good way to make sure that you don't fall into that trap. But that's going to be a really expensive trap going forward. The world's moving so fast with AI, automation, new tools, new ways of working that, the companies that don't challenge the status quo, it's going to become a bigger and bigger issue, in my opinion.
Well, it's sort of, I think, people can get so set in their ways. And to me, life is about constant evolution. I mean, we've got to be willing to evolve and pivot and be malleable. But I'll just give you an example. I think politics, the inefficiencies in political campaigns are totally ridiculous. So, I ran in 2005, 2006, and 2010. 2010 was at the height of the recession. And I'm like, okay, I think, nonprofits and people need more money than my campaign does, because after 6 years, I think people know me. So, and I'm like, okay, you raise all this money to pay for mailers that basically go in the trash. You're paying these handlers that, do you really need them? So we ran a campaign on $5,000 in a city of 200,000 people. One was 64% of the vote. I'm like, okay. And another thing in political campaigns, my strategist in 2005, and we're in 2023, was like, oh man, billboards are the worst waste of money ever. They cost so much, they're totally inefficient. But so after I get out of office, it's still people throwing up billboards and doing mailers, and it's like the world has changed. And I kind of thought, I'm like, maybe I showed people you can do it more efficiently and differently, but it's just when industries and get into that set in their ways mentality, it's really, but I agree with you. If you're not willing to pivot and adapt, ultimately you're going to get run over no matter what the industry is.
I mean, a couple of things on great point on the campaign stuff. I mean, you could probably argue, and you know this better, but probably the biggest expense with campaigns isn't even the direct money that the campaign's raising. It's probably when you start valuing everyone's time and energy that goes into the campaign, right? That it probably adds up to 10x or 100x or some huge multiple of whatever, right? Because campaigning, it's not like a one-day thing. It's it's a long process, right? And think about all the different people that are involved with that and how much energy that could be repurposed into things that create more value, right? So I'm not a political person, but when I just think about the amount of money, time, energy, attention, focus that goes into that and the cost of that, there's got to be a better way to let people know what people stand for in a more kind of fair, even playing field type of way. And then all that extra money and all that extra time could go into things that's going to actually make a bigger impact. Because at the end of the day, you see campaign commercials on TV and you don't really even know what people are standing for. It's just like they blew a lot of money on something just to get your eyeballs on it. And so, I would love to see no more of that. Put all that money towards, a place that more needs it, but the government figures out a way to kind of streamline and systematize a way for you to know what you're voting for in a cost-effective and fair way.
Well, I just want to ask you about this because I was thinking about this morning. You talk about making your teams more efficient and keeping them from burning out and everything. What role as a leader do you think empathy sort of plays in that? And I think in leadership roles, to not want to see, you want your team to be more efficient, but from a mental health perspective, you also don't want them burning out and overstressing themselves.
I think efficiency is the key to avoiding the burnout and helping mental health, right? Because without efficiency, then people are just wasting time, brute forcing things, doing things in a suboptimal way, and that's going to cause them to have to either work harder to accomplish everything that needs to get accomplished, right? Or drop the ball and underperform, which I would argue are, huge factors in, hurting someone's mental health versus setting up good systems and processes so that people they have guardrails so they don't drop the ball, so they don't waste time on low level stuff. And then now they have a higher success rate or a higher probability of success because the majority or a higher percentage of their time is spent where it needs to be spent.
Well, it's interesting. I spent a good bit of time in Australia back in the 90s. And so I went on holiday with a family. They were friends of mine. And I came back to the States and I said, you know what? It was just almost refreshing because while they were on holiday, they weren't talking about work. It was all, where's the next holiday going to be? And I said, cops get 6 weeks off a year, which I think law enforcement probably needs 6 weeks off a year. But my friend said, well, Australia is not the most productive country in the world. And I'm like, but we talk about, as you say.
As measured by what?
I know, as measured by what? But the efficiency, being more efficient and having less stressed out workers, increasing their productivity, but I always talk to people about, I agree it's good to work hard, but I think working smart is equally as important.
Yeah. I think with any statistic or thing like that, it's important to really understand how someone's measuring or what exactly they mean. Because you could probably, I don't know this, I'm just hypothesizing, but I'm sure that you'd probably make an argument that like sweatshops are highly productive or highly efficient. I don't know. But, working people to the bone and also not even seeing kind of what their process, like just because they produce a lot of output doesn't necessarily mean that it's an efficient organization or system. So I think it would be interesting when people are talking about a country being efficient or a company being efficient. It's important to really know is measured by what. But yeah, I believe people should work on things that give them joy or tap into their unique ability and try to get rid of everything else. And I think efficiency is a huge key to that puzzle.
I do as well. And so talk a little bit about your latest book. Just share with our listeners, our viewers about what it's about, how you've just enlighten us a bit.
So I run a company. I'll start with this. I run a company called Leverage, and we help organizations and teams be more efficient. When you think about ways that work has evolved and the different ways of working, it's not just remote or co-located or even hybrid. Like there's so many ways of working now. There's so many new tools. It's not just text and email. Now you've got Slack and Microsoft Teams and Asana and SharePoint and Notion. Like there's a million different tools, and they're all fantastic. But we kind of got ahead of ourselves with these tools, and they rapidly kind of started rolling out without a playbook. And without a playbook with these things, it can cause extra stress, frustration. I call it in my book the scavenger hunt, where now these tools can fundamentally transform the efficiency of an organization if used properly, where properly is not just how to use them, but when to use them. But since there hasn't been a playbook and you get hired and you're kind of thrown in the deep end, and it's like some people on some teams use some tools in some ways, oftentimes you find that actually the excess of tools, if there's not proper training, can actually hurt the business or organization, not help support it.
Yeah.
Right. And I use the word organization because the stuff that we do and I talk about in my book, it's not just for a for-profit business. This could be nonprofit. It could be for a government agency, right? Because it's a way to rethink how a team or an organization works together efficiently. And so after doing this for a long time on the training and consulting side of things, this pattern just was so obvious that emerged, which it doesn't matter your team size, it doesn't matter your industry. You could be a Fortune 10 company, you could be a government agency, you could be a 7-figure entrepreneur, team of 5. There was kind of 3 major buckets you needed to think about to be efficient as an organization. And those 3 buckets are, you need to communicate efficiently. So it doesn't matter if you're a government agency or you're a massive tech company, there's people you need to talk to internally and externally. And so there's different tools to help you with both of those, right? So in my book, I talk about separating the two and having email be your external communication tool and Slack or Microsoft Teams being your internal. And so that's kind of step 1. Step 2 is you need a planning tool. Oftentimes, teams or employees or managers, they're texting, emailing, Slack or Microsoft Teams messaging interchangeably without any rhyme or reason. So you've got to stitch things together to kind of get the full picture. And not only are they using multiple communication platforms to stitch together, they're also lacking a project management tool to delegate work to. So they're doing all that in a communication tool, which should be in a tool like Asana or Monday or ClickUp. So anything that you want to hold someone accountable to, like, hey, Deke, can you get this podcast edited by Friday, right? Most people, 9 out of 10, are doing that in a communications tool, which is just not built to solve that problem. Yeah. It's a hack and sometimes it works, but you can't click a button and just know, what are all the things I asked Nick to do that are past due? What's the status of all the things related to the podcast project? So different tools are built for different purposes. Imagine you were going to take your team camping in the forest. you would need walkie-talkies to communicate, but you would also need a map to navigate out of the forest. So anything that kind of follows that Mad Libs, like, hey, blank, can you do this by blank, should be in a work management tool, not in a communications tool. Of course, you can hack whatever you want, but different tools solve different needs. Then lastly, you have your resources. That's your intellectual property, your knowledge, your SOPs, your processes. How you produce a podcast episode is a process, right? Your core values would be an SOP, standard operating procedure. And so all of this stuff you want to document so that, one, if someone leaves, you're not at risk of losing a bunch of knowledge. Two, you want to make sure that when people get hired, they can get up to speed quickly.
Yeah.
Right? Three, you want to minimize error of when day-to-day operations. So there's so many different benefits from documenting. It's not what people usually wake up in the morning super excited to do, but it's got to be part of the culture. So there are these three buckets: communicate, plan, and resource. And that CPR framework is how I've laid out my book, and it goes through that framework, and it talks about the purpose of each of these types of categories of tools, and not just how, but when to use it. And that's really important. Knowing when to use it is really important, because you got to know, even, okay, in this situation, the most logical place to look is here. Without that, it just creates this scavenger hunt where you're looking in 10 places to look for what you're needing to find. Well, what if you could just look in one place? It's much, much faster to find what you're looking for. And there's a lot of books out there. When I was pitching HarperCollins on the book, part of my pitch was, look, there's all these books on individual productivity. You've got David Allen's Getting Things Done, great book. You've got Tim Ferriss' 4-Hour Workweek. You got other books. There really hasn't been anything around how does an organization operate in a productive, efficient way, right? Individual productivity is necessary, but it's not sufficient for a team to be productive. It requires collaboration, coordination. Sometimes individuals have to sacrifice their own productivity for the greater good of the team. And I wanted this to be kind of my contribution to the business literature. How does an organization be efficient?
No, I love that. But let me ask you this, and you don't have a crystal ball. Nobody can answer this. Obviously, AI is something that everybody's talking about now. I was reading an article that was saying, the government is behind the curve on AI, as they were on the internet in general. But from the standpoint of, your standpoint, I can see how it could increase business efficiencies, could increase communication. But how do you see AI impacting efficiency and communication in the business world?
I think that it's going to get better and better over time. And I think with any of these things, including process optimization and automation, it's just going to be limited to your ability to understand what it's capable of and figure out and be able to realize that this problem I could solve faster if I were to use AI. So I think that that's going to be a challenge that we just got to figure out and educate people to let them. I think that there's a lot of people that don't even realize what it's capable of.
No.
And don't even realize that there's certain workflows that they have right now that you might not be able to fully get off your plate, but every second counts. And if AI can help you save 10 seconds here, 5 minutes there, it all adds up. So I think like anything, it's a tool that can be helpful, and you need to train yourself on leveling up and educating yourself to realize what scenarios in your day-to-day can be optimized or enhanced by using it.
Yeah.
And I think, it's like a trust but verify type of thing. Like, I think, would I fully rely on AI to write an email to the most important client and not check it? Probably not. But could I use it to create me a first draft and then I don't start from scratch? Yeah. But yeah, there's so much that you don't even realize that you could do with this stuff. And that is what I'm interested in. How do you educate people so they understand? Like, for example, now it's quite possible that you could use a call recording tool, and then you could stitch together via Zapier, which is an automation tool. You could get the call recording to trigger Zapier to then run that call recording through ChatGPT with some pre-selected prompts around, finding action items and summaries. And then another step in that process to go and stick it in your knowledge base or your work management tool or whatever you want. Now, most people probably aren't walking around saying, hey, I'm dying for this thing. Like, I'm really stuck on this. But when you're listening to this right now and you're hearing it, it's like, hey, actually, that's pretty cool. I didn't even think of that. And I think that is going to be the big challenge, not so much getting the math to be better and better, which I'm sure it will be. It's really, how do you educate people around all the possibilities that are now, available to them?
Well, I think, to me, new innovation and technology, anything can be used for great good or not so much. And there's always going to be the human influence in it. And my dad in the early 90s told me, he was a CEO, he said, we're going to have a crisis of ethics in the business world. I'd say we might have a crisis of ethics in the political world too, but with these new, innovations in technology, you hope that the influence of them, the human influence, is by people that are ethical, but that's not always going to be the case.
Yeah, I guess you face that in everything, right?
Yeah.
And you have to have fail safes, and you just have to. I think in anything you have to be aware of your risk with things, and try as best as possible. You can't mitigate all risks, but you should at least be aware of the big ones and try your best effort to mitigate it.
Well, let me ask you this. So often there's sort of a dystopian future painted. We've got hyperpolarization in the United States. We've got war in Europe. But somehow I tap into so many, particularly younger people, that are very hopeful about the future of the world. So what makes you hopeful for the future?
I think, at least as it relates to what I do with efficiency, I do believe that all of this new technology that's out, ChatGPT, AI, all the softwares I talk about in my book, automation, I do think that, whether I'm the one to crack it or someone else, but I do believe that training people on the best practices of these things and getting teams to be more efficient is going to free up so much time that people can reinvest into better uses. Whether it's better use could be things that just they're more intellectually stimulated, make them happier, or things that drive more innovation. So I am hopeful that all of these new tools at our disposal are going to allow people to have a better work experience and create more interesting things. On the flip side, there's definitely categories of people that are going to be out of jobs that need to figure out, what do you do once your job, even this weekend, for example, I was working on our client onboarding process. That right now it has been quite manual, and I was trying to think of a more robust way to automate it. And I probably spent a few hours, and I'm probably 3 hours away from fully automating it, and that's going to probably save me 5+ hours a week of paying someone a human to do that forever. Right now, as a business owner, that's great. Now go and spend that time doing something more. But if that person with that freed up time doesn't take also some accountability and responsibility to figure out and work with the business on, higher impact things, they're going to be in trouble. So, I am bullish though, that this is going to lead to a better world for most people. For some people, if there's going to be some jobs that are going to take longer to be extinguished. So I think that it's not that there's going to be an end of jobs, but what people do day to day will change, and it's the responsibility equally so of the employee to stay relevant.
Absolutely. Well, Nick, as we get down towards the end, there are a couple questions I have for you. One, where can our listeners and viewers find you?
Well, the book has a website, comeupforair.com. And on that site, you could find links to buy the book, but I've also put like tons and tons of bonus resources throughout the book. The book was already kind of a jam-packed 320-page book. HarperCollins didn't want it any longer. And I'm an efficiency nut, so you can imagine it would be like a 1,400-page book for most people. So throughout the book, we drop links. If you want the bonus material for this or the playbook for this. So we put all of that on that website. So there's a lot of interesting information you could get there. If you want help on the training side of things, then getleverage.com is my company that does operational efficiency training and consulting.
Okay, my final question for you. On a daily basis, what puts a smile on your face and brings joy to your heart?
Ooh, it's a good question. Well, as it relates to work, knowing that I've made some improvement to the business, something where, okay, we've strengthened the foundation, we've automated a step, it doesn't need to be a massive win to celebrate because it all stacks up.
Yeah.
So for me, I always get kind of excited where there's some improvement to a perpetual asset, let's say, right? Where that asset could be a process or, something that's going to live on forever and not just be worthless next week. And then on a personal level, I like to play chess. So if I have time to go to the park and play a game of speed chess with the hustlers, that also puts a smile on my face.
Well, Nick, I will tell you, thank you for your time. Thank you for being an amazing guest. And thank you for what you're doing, to impact the business community for the better. It sounds like to me you're just not in it for the money. You're in it to make a difference. And we need more people like that. So thank you.
Oh, it was an honor being on your show. Thanks for having me.
All right. That's all the time we've got. Dropping the mic, and we are out.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to or watching the Changemaker podcast today. Greatly appreciate it. If you're listening and you want to see the video, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Deke Copenhaver. That's pretty easy to remember, I would think. But really, we also want to remind you to like, subscribe, rate across all platforms, download. And if you're looking for a coach, a speaker, or anything, you know where to find me. Just email me at me@dekecopenhaver.com. And thanks so much for listening.